On a mountain where storms erase footprints in minutes, one wrong step changes everything.
No! No! No!
The mountain swallowed him whole.
Help! Anyone! Please!
12 meters down. Broken. Bearing.
The cold gnawed him. The darkness whispered. We lost his signal!
Storm wiped every track. We're blind up here.
Thermals show nothing!
Up here, no one even knew he'd vanished.
Lowering line! Slow and steady!
When hope was almost gone, they descended into the mountain's throat.
Lowering line, slow and steady.
When hope was almost gone, they descended into the mountain's throat.
He's breathing, barely. Get him up! They pulled a man back from a place no one returns from.
He's alive! Move! Get him to the chopper!
30 hours in ice, 30 hours in darkness, and still he refused to die.
He was found at the bottom of a frozen pit, barely wider than his own shoulders, his clothes stiff with ice, his breath shallow, and his skin turning the color of snow. 30 hours earlier, the ground beneath him had simply vanished, a thin crust of frost collapsing under his weight and dropping him into a vertical shaft carved by centuries of wind and melting ice. A hidden natural chimney no one knew existed. He fell 12 meters straight down. His leg shattered on impact. His backpack burst open, spilling every piece of gear except his headlamp. And even that flickered until it died, leaving him alone in a darkness so complete it swallowed sound. The temperature inside the shaft dropped to -15 degrees. Coldly, the walls were glass smooth, worn by meltwater, impossible to grip. Every attempt to climb only tore at his hands. Every minute that passed drained the heat from his body. And above him, the circle of daylight shrank as frost gathered around the rim, sealing him deeper beneath the mountain. Grimly, no one knew where he was. No one heard him fall. And the storm rolling in would bury his footprints by dusk. This is the true story of the man who stayed alive inside a frozen tomb. 30 hours in a natural ice chimney, fighting cold, darkness, hunger, and the crushing silence of the mountain, until the moment everything should have ended, but didn't. His name was Adrian Keller, a 36-year-old hiker from southern Germany who had spent more of his adult life in the Alps than in the towns below. He wasn't a mountaineer in the heroic sense. He didn't chase summits, didn't collect climbs like trophies, didn't seek out danger for the thrill of it. What he loved was solitude, the quiet order of nature, the feeling of being swallowed by mountains older than memory. He worked a modest job and lived a modest life, but in the mountains he felt something he couldn't find anywhere else: clarity. On the second week of January, after days of mild snowfall followed by a sudden temperature drop, Adrian decided to take a solo hike along a ridge he knew well. It wasn't an ambitious route, 3 hours up, 2 hours across, and a gentle descent to the opposite valley. But the winter had been strange that year. Warm days thinned the upper crust of snow, and sudden freezes sealed everything again in fragile layers. The walls were translucent in places, pale blue ice layered over glistening rock, smooth as glass, impossible to grip. The opening high above him was a circle of pale daylight, no bigger than a coin. He tried to move. Painfully, pain shot through his leg like fire. He gritted his teeth, breath shaking, and pulled himself onto his elbows. Snow had fallen around him in a soft mound. His backpack lay a meter away, half open, most of its contents scattered around him. He reached for it, dragging it close, fingers numb and shaking. He tried to stand. Sharp intake of breath. His right leg buckled beneath him, sending him crashing back to the ground with a cry he barely recognized as his own. Waves of pain radiated through his thigh, pulsing with every heartbeat. Broken, he knew it instantly. The cold settled against him like a second skin. His breath curled into the air in weak ribbons. His headlamp dimmed again, the battery struggling in the freezing temperature. Internal monologue tone. He forced himself to breathe slowly, to think. He needed warmth, shelter, a way to climb, a signal to send, anything. But the shaft was a trap, carved straight down. The walls offered no holds, no cracks, no mercy. Even with crampons, he wouldn't have made it far. Without them, with a broken leg, escape was impossible. He tried shouting, strange shouting, "Help! Hello!" His voice scraped against the ice and vanished upward in a thin, faint echo. The shaft swallowed sound whole. He waited, listened. Nothing. He tried again. Nothing. Gravely, he wasn't just trapped. He was buried alive. He pulled the headlamp closer, cupping it in his hands to warm the battery. The light brightened for a moment, then steadied into a weak glow. He checked his pockets. His phone? Dead. Too cold to function. His small emergency beacon? Gone. Torn loose in the fall. His rope? Snapped at the middle, frayed ends dangling like torn fabric. Panic began to coil through him like smoke. Sharp sound. He slapped himself across the face, once, twice, trying to pull his mind back into focus. Think, stay calm. Cold kills faster when you panic. He took inventory of what remained. His gloves, a thermal jacket, half a bottle of water, 2 protein bars, a cracked but usable headlamp, and the clothes on his back. Not enough for long. The temperature was dropping. The ice walls were sweating condensation that froze before it reached the floor. His breath felt heavy already. The kind of conditions that make hidden cavities and soft crevices where none existed before. He began his hike just after sunrise, the sky pale blue and cloudless, the air sharp enough to make each breath sting slightly in his throat. He checked his gear twice before leaving his car. Thermal base layers, gloves, crampons, trekking poles, a compact rope, water, energy bars, a small GPS device, and a headlamp. Nothing extreme, nothing unusual. The ridge welcomed him like it always did, with long stretches of white unbroken by footprints and a silence so complete it felt like a presence. As he climbed, the world fell away beneath him, forests shrinking into dark patches, the valley becoming a distant sweep of white. His breath plumed in steady silver clouds. His steps crunched through snow that glittered under the winter sun. He felt at peace. He didn't know that beneath his boots, the mountain had changed. The first sign came in the form of a hollow echo. Subtle, a soft thump instead of a crisp crunch when he planted his right foot. He paused, shifted weight, pressed down gently. The snow gave slightly, sinking more than expected. He frowned and took a cautious backward step. Then he heard the sound, a brittle crack, sharp as breaking glass. For a heartbeat, everything stopped, even his breath. And then the ground collapsed. The snow gave way beneath him, the crust breaking like thin ice. He dropped instantly, arms flinging out instinctively, fingers clawing at the disappearing rim. For a moment, his right hand caught the edge, a fleeting grasp on survival, but the snow crumbled under his weight. He fell. The world became a blur of white and blue, a cylinder of ice racing around him as he plummeted into the earth. His body struck a wall halfway down, twisting painfully. His right leg smashed against something hard, and a crack, sickening, deep, echoed through his bones. His breath left him in a strangled gasp. Then he hit the bottom. Heavy impact sound. The impact knocked the world out of him. When he opened his eyes, there was darkness pressing from all sides. His headlamp flickered weakly from where it had landed near his shoulder, casting a shaky beam over the walls. He was inside a shaft carved by nature, perfectly vertical, about 1.5 meters wide. He shifted position, trying not to move his leg too much. The cold bit into him instantly, sinking through fabric, tightening around him like invisible claws. Wind whistled faintly at the top of the shaft as the storm approached. He wasn't going anywhere, not without help. He knew the mountain well. He knew the trails, and he knew this area wasn't one people visited in winter. His car was parked far below. The trailhead was quiet. If no one saw his car by nightfall, maybe someone would wonder. But nightfall was hours away, and temperatures would drop to -20 C. He could feel the cold already creeping into his bones. He adjusted his jacket, pulled his gloves tighter, wrapped his arms around his chest, curled slightly to conserve heat. His headlamp flickered again, as though the darkness were swallowing it piece by piece. He stared upward at the shrinking circle of daylight, now rimmed with frost, a pale halo, a reminder of a world he could no longer reach. Above him, the wind howled. Below him, the ice cracked. And he understood, with painful clarity, that survival would not be a matter of strength or skill or preparation. It would be a matter of holding on to consciousness, breath by breath, in a frozen prison where the mountain itself seemed determined to bury him. His 30 hours had just begun. The cold crept into him with a patience almost deliberate, as though the ice itself had hands, quiet and methodical, working their way through his clothes, slipping between layers, searching for the warmth in his chest. Adrian felt it settle deeper by the hour, not in sudden shocks, but in slow waves that stole sensation, one fingertip, one toe, one breath at a time. The shaft around him groaned every so often, a low, distant rumble from somewhere deep within the mountain, a reminder that he was inside a living structure, one that shifted, settled, and breathed in its own ancient way. He pulled the jacket tighter around himself, trying to trap what little warmth remained, but the effort felt futile. The cold didn't care about layers. It seeped through everything, indifferent to fabric and desperation. His fingers felt thick, clumsy. He rubbed them together hard, forcing sensation back into them with a grim determination he wasn't sure he could sustain. His headlamp flickered again. He held still. The shaft plunged into blackness the moment the light sputtered, and each time it happened, even for a heartbeat, it felt as though the darkness was swallowing him whole. When the light steadied again, faint and trembling, relief washed through him, sharp, painful, fleeting. He lifted it, letting the beam trace the walls around him. The shaft was a cylinder of ice, smooth as frozen glass, narrowing slightly as it climbed upward. The rim, nearly 15 meters above him, had frosted over in the last hour, shrinking the halo of daylight into a thin, pale ring. Snowflakes drifted past the opening, tumbling downward in slow spirals before dissolving against the cold walls. The storm had arrived early. He pressed his hand against the wall, testing it again for holds. His gloves slid effortlessly across the icy surface. Even bare-handed, even bleeding, he wouldn't be able to grip it. He had tried climbing once already, knowing it was impossible, but refusing to accept it. and the attempt had cost him dearly. The effort had torn the skin of his palms, scraped layers away, until the cold bit deeper into exposed raw flesh. His leg had given out under him halfway up, sending him collapsing back into the snow at the bottom. He'd lain there for several minutes after that fall, gasping, teeth grit against the pain, trying to keep from screaming. Screaming would waste breath. Screaming would drain warmth. Screaming would change nothing. Now, the memory made him flinch. He closed his eyes, steadying his breathing. He needed a plan, even a small one, anything to keep his mind from focusing on the cold. He reached for the protein bar in his pocket. His fingers struggled with the wrapper. He tore it using his teeth, hands shaking, shoulders trembling uncontrollably. He chewed slowly, forcing himself to swallow despite the dryness in his throat. Each calorie mattered. Each bit of energy was something the cold would try to take from him. When he finished, he closed his eyes again. The storm howled above him. Beeping sound. His watch beeped faintly as the hour changed. The sound startled him, sharp, familiar, painfully normal in the middle of this unnatural prison. He raised his wrist toward the headlamp's trembling glow. 3 hours had passed. Only 3. He whispered something under his breath, not a prayer, not a curse, just a quiet exhale of disbelief. He tried calling out again. "Hello? Is anyone? Hello? Can anyone hear me?"
The walls sent his voice spiraling upward, stretched and thin, a ghost of a sound that evaporated long before it reached the surface. He shouted again, louder this time, throat burning. Nothing. He lowered his head. It wasn't realistic to expect someone to hear him. He knew that. This ridge wasn't a popular route in winter. Few people hiked here after snowfall. And even if someone passed nearby, the storm would swallow his voice before it reached open air. Still, he shouted one more time. Hope was irrational, but it was the only warmth he had. Minutes bled into more minutes. The cold deepened. His injured leg throbbed with a relentless, deep ache that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. He tried to straighten it, but a bolt of pain shot upward so forcefully he nearly retched. He clutched the thigh with both hands, breathing hard, willing the pain to dull. He needed to stay awake. He needed to keep moving his hands. He needed to keep his mind from drifting. He turned the headlamp off, saving what little power remained. Darkness flooded the shaft quickly, consuming all shape and depth. He sat with it for a long time, letting his breathing stabilize. Closing his eyes made no difference anymore. The world was black either way. He listened. Wind above, the soft hiss of drifting snow, the cracks in the ice, his own heart, slow and heavy. Time felt stretched, elastic, unreliable. He tried counting seconds to measure it, but at some point he lost track. He tried humming quietly to keep his mind awake, but his lips were so cold he couldn't form the notes properly. He ran his hands up and down his arms, down his legs, across his torso, creating friction, any friction, but even that grew harder as his muscles stiffened. He was sliding toward hypothermia, and he knew it. The next hours were a blur. At some point, he turned the headlamp on again, just for a moment, needing the reassurance of sight. The light revealed a thin layer of frost forming along his clothing. Ice crystals clung to the edges of his jacket, shimmering like tiny daggers. His breath came out in thick clouds that lingered longer than before. He checked his water, not much left. But if he didn't drink, dehydration would come faster than hypothermia. He took a sip. The water was near freezing, biting at his tongue. He forced it down. The lamp flickered. He tapped it. It steadied, for now. He aimed it upward.
The opening had narrowed again, frost thickening around the rim. Snow was falling heavily, swirling down into the shaft, gathering at the bottom around him in a cold mound. He brushed it away from his legs, but it only piled again. He realized, with a quiet dread, that when the storm fully hit, the shaft might seal entirely. The thought sent a surge of adrenaline through him. He sat upright, breath sharp. He couldn't let that happen. He needed to keep the opening clear. He needed to... A sudden crack tore through the air. He jerked his head upward. Another crack, louder, closer. Then a deep, slow groan. The mountain shifted. Snow dislodged from the rim and cascaded downward in a sudden avalanche of frost and ice. He threw his arms over his head as it rained upon him, burying him briefly under a cold, crushing weight before sliding down around him. His breathing stuttered, his chest tightened, panic clawed at him. He brushed snow off his jacket with frantic hands, gasping, blinking through the flurry. He aimed the headlamp upward. The rim had shrunk significantly. Snow and ice clung to the edges, threatening to collapse further. He leaned back, staring upward in horror. The mountain was swallowing him, fully, completely, irreversibly. He shouted again, voice cracking. "Help! Please! Someone! I'm down here! Help!" Nothing. The cold deepened around him like a closing fist. He pressed his back against the ice wall, chest rising and falling rapidly. He wasn't freezing. He wasn't starving. He wasn't dying by inches. He was being entombed. The realization hit him with a force that stole his breath. He reached for his backpack, tearing through what remained inside. He pulled out the small metal spork he kept for meals. Useless. He grabbed a climbing spike. The fall had bent it nearly in half. Clatter sound. He tossed it aside. Rope snapped. His small emergency blanket torn. Then he found it. His flare. A single, weather-resistant rescue flare meant for avalanche situations. He didn't remember packing it. It must have been from last season. But it was there. Cold, heavy, wrapped in red, waterproof casing. He stared at it in the dim headlamp glow. He couldn't fire it down here. No one would see it. The light would be swallowed whole. But maybe, just maybe, if he placed it high enough, if the shaft didn't collapse entirely, if someone passed within sight of the rim. It was a chance, a small one, a desperate one, but it was something. He wiped the frost from his eyebrows with trembling hands. He drew a breath, and then another. He was going to climb, not all the way up, not to the top. He knew that was impossible. But if he could get even halfway, if he could place the flare on a ledge, maybe someone would see the glow. He pressed his bare hand against the ice wall. Cold pierced him instantly, biting deep. He ignored it. He grit his teeth, and he reached upward to climb the frozen tomb that held him. He stared at the ice wall towering above him, the faint circle of daylight now barely more than a pale smudge behind a lacework of frost. His breath came in shallow, uneven bursts, each exhale curling into the air and dissolving as quickly as it formed. The cold gnawed deeper into him with each minute that passed, creeping through muscle and bone until it felt like it lived inside him. But he didn't let himself fold inward. He had a flare. He had one chance. He had to climb. He pressed both palms against the ice, testing it again. Smooth, impossibly smooth. Any grip he found would be temporary at best. Even a few meters would require strength he didn't know he had. But he couldn't think about the entire climb. He couldn't think about half the shaft. He couldn't even think about the next meter. Just one movement, one upward motion at a time. Adrian tucked the flare inside his jacket, securing it so tightly he could feel its cold metal pressing against his ribs. The weight reminded him it was still there, his single, fragile piece of hope in a place designed to grind hope into dust. He exhaled slowly, watching the breath linger in the air. "Okay," he whispered to no one. "Okay," slowly. He placed the toe of his good boot against the wall. The crampon spikes scratched faintly against the ice. His injured leg brushed the ground, sending a wave of fire through his thigh. He sucked air sharply between his teeth, but kept his focus. He pressed upward, shifting his weight onto his good leg, pushing until his trembling body lifted a few centimeters. His gloves slid immediately on the ice. He clawed blindly for anything, a bump, a ridge, a crack, but there was nothing. His palms scraped uselessly, friction barely enough to stabilize him. But he held his position, just a few centimeters off the ground. That alone felt like victory. He braced his forehead against the ice, breath fogging the wall. His hands shook violently, muscles protesting the strain, but he didn't let go. Seconds stretched, then a minute, then more. His arms burned, but he forced them to stay rigid. He looked upward. The flare needed height, any height. Even 8 or 9 meters below the rim might be enough for someone to see the glow if they passed nearby. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't logical. But survival wasn't logical. Survival belonged to the irrational, to the stubborn, to the ones who refused to be buried. He pushed upward again, slow, jerky. His boots slid down a few centimeters. He grunted, teeth clenched, and pushed harder. His gloves screamed against the ice, fabric fibers tearing. His breath grew ragged. Another few centimeters. His injured leg swung uselessly beneath him, the pain stabbing through his body with each movement. His fingers were numb. His arms felt heavy, too heavy. His lungs burned. But he kept climbing. One movement, then another, then another. His gloves slipped suddenly, body jerking downward, but he jammed the toe of his boot into a shallow indentation in the wall, barely enough to slow his slide. "Come on," he hissed. "Come on." He pushed upward again. The world narrowed into nothing but the ice in front of him and the trembling of his muscles. He didn't allow himself to look up anymore. The distance would break him. He didn't allow himself to think about falling. That thought alone carried a weight too heavy to bear. Just one more push. His arms buckled. He sagged, chest slamming against the wall. His chin scraped the ice. He gasped, breath scattering. His fingers trembled violently now, unable to close fully. The cold had seeped too deep. He had too little strength left. Still, he forced his gloves against the ice again. His breaths echoed strangely inside the shaft, weak and thin. His vision blurred at the edges, darkening slightly. Hypothermia was setting in, dulling everything. The pain, the sound, the strength in his limbs. He tried to push. Nothing. He tried again. Nothing. His breath cracked into a sob, his forehead pressing against the ice. "Please," he whispered, voice breaking. "Please, just let me, just..." His gloves slid downward. He couldn't stop it. He fell. Not far. Not a plummet, but enough for his body to collapse into the snow, sending shock waves of pain through his leg and ribs. The flare jabbed his side. His arms curled around himself instinctively, trying to protect what little warmth remained. He lay there for a long moment, breath ragged, mind spinning. His climb was over. Even if he had more strength, even if he had more time, the cold had won this battle. His limbs no longer obeyed him. His fingers were numb. His thoughts came slow, syrup thick, wandering. His eyes drifted upward. The shaft was shrinking, the rim narrowing, daylight fading behind a swirl of falling snow. He blinked slowly. He whispered again, softer. Please. He wasn't speaking to the mountain. He wasn't speaking to fate. He wasn't speaking to anyone. He was speaking to the moment inside him that still wanted to survive. But the cold answered. It sank deeper, wrapping around him like a slow closing fist. His body curled instinctively into a fetal position, arms around his chest, protecting his core. His breath grew slower, shallow. He felt tired, so deeply tired he couldn't feel the cold anymore. He knew what that meant. The hypothermia had reached a dangerous stage, the point where the body begins to numb itself, shutting down non-essential parts to protect the heart. But even the heart couldn't last in these temperatures. He felt the world tilt slightly. The shaft spun faintly. His eyelids dipped. Then, a sound, a distant rumble, a muffled thunder. He jerked at the noise. It came again, closer this time. Not thunder, not the storm. A helicopter! His pulse spiked painfully. He pushed himself upright, eyes wide. His breath turned frantic, fog bursting around his face. He pressed both hands against the ice, leaning back to look upward. Snow fell heavier now, but above it, past the frost, he saw movement. Shapes, blades, fleeting shadows cutting across the shrinking circle of light. They were searching. Someone had reported his car. Someone had noticed his absence. Someone had sounded the alarm. He shouted, "Here! Down here! I'm here!" His voice cracked into pieces, raw and weak. The helicopter blades drowned most of the sound. He shouted again. His throat tore at the effort. A piece of ice fell from the rim and struck his shoulder. He barely felt it. He shouted again, louder, voice breaking. But the helicopter passed. Its shadow slid across the rim. Then vanished. He stared upward, chest heaving, desperation burning hotter than the cold. "No, no, please, come back. I'm here, here." His voice dissolved into a rasp. The helicopter did not return. The world dimmed again. Snow thickened. Wind howled. His hope wavered like the last flicker of his dying headlamp. But he wasn't alone, not entirely, because the helicopter hadn't passed by accident. It meant search teams were in the area. It meant people were looking. He wasn't buried yet. He pressed his back against the wall and forced himself to breathe, slow and steady. He pulled the flare out from inside his jacket. He stared at it again, the red casing glowing faintly in the headlamp's light. He couldn't climb the shaft, but he could wait for the storm to lift. He could listen for footsteps. He could listen for voices. He could wait for the next pass of the helicopter. The flare was his last chance. He needed to conserve it, use it at the exact right moment. Not too early, not too late. His eyelids drooped. He snapped them open. Slapping sound. He slapped his cheeks with numbing hands. He breathed deeply, forcing awareness back into his foggy mind. He couldn't sleep. Sleep was death. Sleep meant the cold would take him quietly. He wiped frost from his eyebrows. He leaned his head against the wall. He listened. Wind, snow, silence. He whispered to himself quietly, like a man trying to stay awake behind the wheel of his own fading consciousness, weakly chanting, "Stay awake, stay awake, stay alive." The storm raged above him, and he sat in a frozen grave, holding a flare that could save him or burn out before anyone ever saw it. The storm did not ease. It deepened, gathering weight and sound above the shaft until the wind howled like a living thing, pressing snow into every crack, every fold, every opening it could reach. Adrian listened to it with a hollow dread, each gust a reminder that the mountain was sealing itself in ice and he was trapped at its core. Snowflakes drifted down the shaft in thick spirals now, landing on his shoulders and melting instantly against what little warmth remained in his jacket, only to refreeze moments later. He tucked his chin into his collar, but even that small movement hurt. His leg pulsed with sharp, rhythmic pain that made his stomach twist. He tried shifting position to ease the pressure, but any movement sent shocks of agony through him.
He clenched his jaw, teeth chattering, breath trembling. The flare sat in his lap like some artifact from another life, one where he wasn't buried alive, freezing alone. He held it in both hands, turning it slowly, feeling the cold metal burn against his palms. It was heavier than he remembered, or maybe he was weaker than he realized. His muscles felt like wet rope, heavy, clumsy, drained of all strength. He looked up. The rim was shrinking again. Snow gathered around the edge, forming uneven white lips that seemed to curl inward. The pale patch of daylight above flickered as clouds rolled past, nearly extinguished behind thick layers of storm. He watched it hypnotically, eyes half-lidded, drifting somewhere between waking and a deep, heavy exhaustion that scared him more than the cold. He blinked hard, forcing himself back. "Stay awake," he whispered the words out loud. His voice was so quiet, he barely heard it himself. "Stay awake. Not yet. Not yet." His eyelids bipped again. He slapped his cheek with his numb hand. The sound was weak, but the shock of pain helped. For a moment, he rubbed his arms, tried to shake warmth back into his body. But he couldn't tell if it worked, or if he was imagining it. His fingers had lost almost all sensation, his toes too. Even his breath felt distant, like something happening to someone else. A strange calm seeped into him, soft, warm, comforting. He fought it instantly. He had seen enough documentaries, read enough accounts, listened to enough rescue stories to recognize the signs. Hypothermia wasn't just cold. Hypothermia was deception. It made you feel warm when you were dying. It made sleep feel sweet. It made the end feel gentle. He shook his head violently. "Not yet," he rasped. "Not now. Not like this." He pressed his palms against the ice wall, pushing himself upright. His head swam. The shaft tilted. For a moment, he wasn't sure if he was sitting or leaning or falling. He blinked again, harder this time. The world steadied slightly. His breath came in quick, sharp bursts that fogged in front of him. Focus. He closed his eyes and pictured the flare again. The metal in his hands, the fuse, the burst of red smoke, the hiss of fire, the signal rising above the shaft like a beacon. He imagined the helicopter returning. He imagined rescuers seeing the red plume. Ropes dropping, lights filling the shaft. Hands reaching down to him. He imagined warmth. He forced his eyes open, clinging to the image like a lifeline.
He wasn't dead, not yet. And if he could still imagine rescue, he wasn't done fighting. He drew a breath, deep, painful, sharp. And then he heard it. A sound. Faint at first, almost indistinguishable from the wind. A muffled thump, rhythmic, steady. He lifted his head, listening. His breath stilled. The sound came again. Footsteps. Real ones, crunching through snow somewhere close to the rim. His heart lurched so violently he clutched his chest. His breath caught. He stared up through the thick swirl of falling snow, eyes wide, body trembling. "Hello!" he screamed, the word tearing from his throat. "Down here! Help!" His voice cracked, raw and thin. The wind swallowed it instantly. He shouted again, desperation cracking through him. "Stop! Someone! Please!" Silence. For a moment, the footsteps seemed to fade. Panic ripped through him like fire. He scrambled for the flare with trembling hands. He didn't have time to think. He pulled the cap, struck the ignition, and ignited it. The flare burst to life with a violent hiss, flooding the shaft with a searing red glow. Sparks shot upward. Smoke filled the air, rising in thick spirals. The heat stung his face, a painful shock that felt like life returning to his skin. He raised the flare upward, arms shaking violently. "Hello!" he screamed, voice echoing in the shaft. "Please, I'm here!" The flare burned fiercely, its fiery glow illuminating every ridge of ice, every fracture line, every breath of vapor curling from his mouth. The shaft looked alive, walls shimmering in red light, dancing with shadows. Above, the footsteps stopped. For a heartbeat, Adrian didn't breathe. Then a voice, faint, distant, carried through the storm. "Hello! Hello down there!" He nearly collapsed. "Yes! Yes! I'm here! Down here!" Another voice joined the first. He couldn't make out the words, but they were real, human, close. He held the flare higher. A shape appeared at the rim, blurred by snow, distorted by distance, but unmistakably human. The figure leaned forward, shielding their eyes from the smoke. "We see you! Hold on!" Adrian sobbed, a broken, gasping sound tearing from him. Relief hit him so hard, his vision blurred. "I'm here," he whispered. "I'm still here." Voices multiplied, footsteps gathered, tools clinked. Someone shouted instructions over the wind. More figures appeared, silhouettes framed against the dimming sky. Overlapping voices. "We're getting a rope. Stay still. Don't move. We've got you." He wanted to laugh, to scream, to collapse. His body sagged, adrenaline collapsing into exhaustion. The flare burned low in his hand, sputtering, then finally dying. Darkness reclaimed the shaft. But he wasn't afraid of it anymore. Not now. Not with voices above him. Not with people who knew exactly where he was. He sank against the ice wall, letting the darkness surround him again. His chest heaved with quiet sobs, breath fogging in the cold. He closed his eyes, letting the warmth of relief wash through him in a trembling wave. Above, the rescue team worked quickly. A rope unfurled, swinging gently as it descended into the shaft. A harness followed. More voices echoed down. "Adrian, can you hear us? We're coming down. Hold on." A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, bright and steady. It landed on him, finally, blessedly, illuminating his frozen figure curled against the wall. He blinked into the light, tears freezing on his cheeks. Whispering in awe, "I see you," he whispered. "I see you." A head appeared above the shaft, followed by a rescuer's body, harnessed and secured, descending slowly toward him. The beam of the flashlight grew brighter. Calm, reassuring tone. "Adrian," the rescuer called softly, voice echoing down the shaft. "You're going to be all right." Broken laugh. He laughed, a broken, exhausted sound that echoed back off the ice. For the first time since he fell, he believed it. The rescuer's boots touched the snow at the bottom of the shaft with a soft, muted crunch, the sound small and strangely delicate inside the icy tomb. Adrian blinked up at him through the beam of light, every breath sharp and ragged. The darkness around him seemed to recoil from the arrival of another human being, from the warmth of a living presence that cut through the cold like a thin blade. The rescuer knelt immediately, his gloves brushing gently against Adrian's frozen jacket. Gentle, professional tone. "Adrian, my name is Lucas," he said, voice steady despite the rush of the storm above. "We're going to get you out of here." Whispering, "You are an advanced audio generation model. Your goal is to generate a human-like voice performance that adheres to the following situational awareness rules. Critical instructions. 1. Non-verbal cues. Text in square brackets is a stage direction. Do not read it aloud. Instead, generate the corresponding sound. Laughs. Generate a natural laugh. Sighs. Generate an audible sigh. Clears throat. Generate the sound of clearing throat. Gasps. Take a sharp breath. Tone and emotion. Directives like whispering or angry apply to the spoken text that follows. Whispering, secret. Whisper the word secret. Shouting, hey. Shout the word hey. Consistency and context. Maintain a consistent character voice, personality, and emotional state throughout the performance. If an emotion is established, like cheerfully, maintain it until explicitly changed. Ensure laughter and nonverbal sounds match the established voice personality. Input. That was so funny. Sighs. But I'm tired now. Input. Be quiet. Clears throat. Uh-huh. Is he gone? Audio output. That was so funny. But I'm tired now. But I'm tired now. Whispering. Be quiet. Uh-huh. Is he gone? Script to perform. Whispering. Adrian opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. His voice came out as nothing more than a hoarse whisper, barely audible. I waited." "I know," Lucas said softly. "You did everything right. You held on." The rescuer shone his flashlight over Adrian's body, scanning quickly but thoroughly. The trembling limbs, the frost accumulating on his sleeves, the dark swelling around his injured leg. Lucas's expression tightened behind a frost on his visor. "How long?" he asked quietly. Adrian struggled to speak. The cold had stiffened his jaw, and his breath came in shallow gasps. "Hours," he managed. "All night." Lucas nodded as if he had expected that answer. He reached for his radio, clipped to his harness, and pressed the button. Radio filter tone. Team 1 to base. Subject located. Alive but in hypothermic condition. Leg injury confirmed. Preparing extraction now. Static crackled, then a voice replied. "Copy, Team 1. Secure him. Storm's worsening. Lucas turned back to Adrian. I'm going to get the harness around you. I need you to help me just a little, all right? Just enough to shift your weight. Adrian nodded weakly. The rescuer wrapped the harness around his torso with practiced speed, making sure the straps were snug but not painful. Each movement jostled Adrian's leg, sending waves of agony bursting through him, but he clenched his teeth and endured it. You're doing great, Lucas murmured. Just a bit more. The shaft above rumbled with the weight of shifting snow. Lucas froze, listening, one hand automatically bracing Adrian's shoulder. Groaning sound. The ice groaned. A long, low sound like the mountain itself was inhaling. Adrian held his breath. Then the sound faded. Urgent tone. Storm's packing the rim, Lucas muttered, glancing upward. We need to move fast. He pulled the rope tight, signaling to the team above with 2 sharp tugs. The line went taut immediately. All right, he said, voice firm. They're going to lift you. I'll be right behind you. You might swing a little as you go up, but I'll guide you. Whatever happens, keep your arms in. Don't reach for the sides. Adrian swallowed hard. I'm ready. Lucas nodded once. Up. The rope jerked gently, rising with slow, measured force. Adrian felt his body lift from the snow, the harness tightening around his ribs. His injured leg dangled, sending fresh waves of stabbing pain through him. He clenched the straps, breath hitching. The walls drew closer as he rose, the red marks from the flare dimly visible along their smooth, frozen surfaces. He drifted slightly, and Lucas steadied him from below, one hand guiding his back. Easy, easy. The wind above roared louder now, funneling down the shaft in freezing gusts that sliced across his face. Snow fell onto him in thick sheets, stinging his cheeks like icy needles. Higher, higher. The rim grew nearer, still shrouded in swirling white, but undeniably closer. Adrian's heart pounded with a mixture of relief and dread. The storm was furious now, battering the mountain with a relentless force that echoed through the shaft like distant thunder. Halfway up, the rope jerked suddenly. Adrian's breath stopped. What? He gasped. Lucas shouted upward. Hold tension, tension only. The rope steadied, but the momentary jolt had swung Adrian hard into the wall. His shoulder slammed against the ice, and pain shot through him, sharp and jagged. Ugh. He groaned through clenched teeth, squeezing his eyes shut. Stay with me, Lucas called from below. You're all right, just a shift in the wind. Keep breathing. Adrian forced a breath, then another. The team above shouted commands to each other, their voices muffled by the storm. The rope adjusted, pulling him more steadily upward. Lucas climbed beneath him, movements sure and controlled, always keeping one hand ready to steady him if the swing returned. The rim neared. He could see shapes, blurred figures leaning over the edge, peering down through swirling snow. Their headlamps cut jagged beams through the storm. He reached up instinctively, though he knew they were still too far to grasp him. Then, a deep crack thundered through the shaft. The rim above them shifted violently as a section of overhanging snow collapsed inward, sending a cascade of white roaring down. Adrian screamed as Lucas shoved himself between the falling snow and Adrian's body, shielding him as best he could. The avalanche of powder slammed against them, burying Adrian in cold, smothering weight. His breath vanished. He couldn't move. For a terrifying moment, he wasn't in a shaft anymore. He was buried alive inside the wall of a mountain. Choking. He gasped and inhaled snow, choking. Lucas slammed his free hand against the wall, signaling danger. Stop the lift! Stop! The rope froze. You are an advanced audio generation model. Your goal is to generate a human-like voice performance that adheres to the following situational awareness rules. Nonverbal cues. Text in square brackets is a stage direction. Do not read it aloud. Instead, generate the corresponding sound. Tone and emotion. Directives like whispering or angry apply to the spoken text that follows. Whispering, secret. Whisper the word secret. Shouting, hey. Shout the word hey. Consistency and context. Maintain a consistent character voice, personality, and emotional state throughout the performance. If an emotion is established, example, cheerfully, maintain it until explicitly changed. Ensure laughter and nonverbal sounds match the established voice personality. The snow continued pouring for several seconds, then slowed, then stopped altogether. Adrian coughed violently, his throat raw, chest burning. Lucas wiped snow from his face, checking his airway. "You with me?" he said urgently. "Adrian, look at me." Adrian blinked through a haze of white and pain. "I'm here." Lucas exhaled sharply in relief. Above them, someone yelled down, "Is he secure?" "Yes," Lucas shouted back. "Resume lift, slowly." They rose again, inch by inch. Every second felt like a lifetime. The wind tore at the rim, reshaping it continually. Snow piled, slid, recollapsed. The rescuers above worked frantically to keep the edge clear, digging with gloved hands, shouting warnings to each other. Adrian's vision blurred, his breath shook, his mind drifted, but the rope kept rising. And then, hands reached down, real hands, warm hands, human hands. "Got him! Pull!" His body was dragged upward, away from the icy walls, breaking free of the shaft completely as the rescuers hauled him onto solid ground. Crunching snow. Snow crunched beneath him. The wind blasted across his frozen face. The storm roared around him with a violence he had never felt so grateful to experience. He collapsed into the snow, staring up at the swirling sky. He was out. He was out. He was out of the shaft. Lucas climbed out moments later, pulling himself over the rim with the help of two teammates. He knelt immediately beside Adrian, pressing a hand against his shoulder. "You're safe," Lucas said softly. "You're out." Adrian opened his mouth, but only a trembling breath escaped. The rescuers moved quickly around him, wrapping him in emergency blankets, checking his pulse, his breathing, his pupils. One of them radioed in the update. "Subject extracted, severe hypothermia, possible fracture. We need immediate evac." Another rescuer leaned closer to Adrian. "Stay awake," she said softly. "Look at me. Stay awake now. We've got you." He nodded weakly, eyelids fluttering. Voices blurred around him. The storm screamed above him. Lights danced in his vision. He felt his body being lifted onto a stretcher. He felt straps securing him. He felt movement, fast, purposeful. Lucas walked beside him, one hand resting on the stretcher's edge. Adrian forced one last whisper through his frozen lips. "Thank you." Lucas squeezed his hand. "You held on," he said. "That's what saved you." The team moved quickly through the snow, disappearing into the blizzard as they carried Adrian away from the shaft. Behind them, the storm took the mountain again. The opening collapsed completely. The ice sealed shut. The shaft vanished as though it had never existed. But Adrian was no longer inside it. He was alive. The stretcher bobbed gently as the rescuers maneuvered through the snow, their boots sinking into the drifts with heavy, deliberate steps. Each movement sent vibrations through Adrian's frozen body, small tremors that radiated outward from his injured leg and pulsed up his spine. He tried to keep his eyes open, but the storm's wind stung them, and exhaustion pulled at him like a tide. Shapes moved around him, silhouettes blurred by blowing snow, headlamps cutting ribbons of light through the blizzard. Voices rose and fell, firm but calm, grounding the chaos with steady instructions. Watch the slope. Shift left. Keep the tarp tight. Block the wind from his face. Adrian could barely register the words, but he felt their urgency, their coordination, their determination. Each voice sounded like salvation. Each shout felt like someone holding on to him, refusing to let him slip back into the frozen dark he'd escaped. The stretcher tilted slightly as they descended the ridge. His head rolled to the side, and he caught a glimpse of the mountain, an endless sweep of white, hostile and indifferent. Snow spun violently, reducing the world to nothing but the narrow path carved by the rescuer's boots. Shivering, he shivered uncontrollably. Every muscle trembled, every breath shook. A rescuer leaned over him, adjusting the emergency blanket around his chest. "Stay awake, Adrian," she said, her voice gentle but direct. "It's important you stay with us right now. Keep your eyes open for me." He tried. His eyelids fluttered. The edges of his vision darkened. His body wanted to fold inward, to surrender to the warmth of unconsciousness. But she placed a gloved hand lightly on his cheek, turning his head toward her. "There you go," she said. "Stay with me." He swallowed, the effort painful, slurring slightly, trying. They reached a bend in the ridge where the wind screamed harder, blasting them sideways. The rescuers braced their legs, leaning into the storm. Snow tore across Adrian's face, needling him through the thin oxygen mask they'd fitted over his mouth. He felt the cold seep into the corners of the mask, frosting its edges. Lucas walked beside the stretcher, one hand on the frame, the other gripping a walking axe for balance. His visor was coated in snow, but his eyes stayed fixed on Adrian, scanning constantly for any sign of deterioration. "You're doing good," Lucas said over the wind. "Not far now. Just stay with us." A distant roar cut through the storm, not thunder, not wind. Helicopter rotor increasing. A helicopter. Adrian's heart lurched weakly. The sound grew louder, blades chopping through the air, sending vibrations through the mountain. A floodlight pierced the blizzard, sweeping across the slope before circling back and locking on to the rescue team. Shouting, "There!" someone shouted. "They have us!" The helicopter descended low, fighting the storm, tilting against the gale. Snow spiraled in violent circles beneath its rotor wash, blasting the rescuers as they approached the landing zone, a small, flattened clearing they'd packed earlier with shovels and boots. The stretcher jolted as they carried him toward the waiting aircraft. Adrian squinted against the intense light, blinking through tears. The helicopter's doors slid open, and medics jumped out immediately, lowering themselves into the snow with practiced urgency. "He's hypothermic," Lucas said, raising his voice over the rotor noise. "Possible femur fracture. He's been down there for hours." "How many hours?" the medic asked while kneeling beside him. "More than 20, Lucas said. "Maybe over 25. The medic's jaw tightened. "Get him loaded, now." The rescuers lifted the stretcher again, sliding it across the snow and into the helicopter's interior. The warmth inside hit him like a wall. Not heat exactly, but the absence of cold. The first breath of air that didn't bite at his lungs. The medic leaned close. "Adrian, can you hear me?" He nodded weakly. "We're going to take care of you. You're safe now." Safe. The word drifted through the haze in his mind like a fragile ember. He clung to it, holding it tightly as the medic strapped him in, fitted a new oxygen mask over his mouth, and pressed heated packs against his chest and under his arms. His body shook violently as the warmth began to circulate, an involuntary reaction that rattled his bones. The medic placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's okay. That's normal. That means your body is fighting." Shouting. He tried to speak, but the mask muffled his voice. His breath fogged the plastic rapidly. The helicopter lifted. The world outside the window dissolved into white wind and swirling snow. The storm swallowed the mountain as if trying to reclaim him, as if angered that he had escaped its frozen grip. His eyes drifted toward the floor. The stretcher vibrated with the aircraft's movements, a rhythmic hum that threatened to lull him into sleep. The medic noticed immediately. Sharp command. "Adrian," she said sharply, tapping his cheek. "Hey, eyes open, don't drift yet." He forced them open. Her voice softened. "You're going to make it," she said. "You did the hard part. Just stay awake a little longer." He tried to nod. Wincing, pain shot through his leg, and he winced. "We'll treat that soon," she reassured him. "We're 10 minutes out." The helicopter banked slightly, and for the first time, the mountain's silhouette emerged through a thinning patch of storm. Massive, jagged, ancient. Adrian stared at it through blurred eyes, the memory of the shaft pulling at him. He whispered through the mask, "Thought I wouldn't leave." "You left," the medic said. "That's what matters." His chest tightened, not from the cold now, but from something heavier, something deeper. Relief mixed with disbelief. Gratitude tangled with exhaustion. The weight of the entire ordeal pressed down on him, threatening to break him even after he had escaped. His breath trembled. Quiet sobbing. A tear slid down his cheek. Then another, then more. The medic adjusted the blanket around him, her voice low. "It's okay. You're safe to feel it now." He didn't answer. Cold tears slid across his temples, disappearing into the collar of his jacket. He stared upward, eyes unfocused, letting the hum of the helicopter fill his ears. Minutes passed in a slow, drifting blur. The helicopter descended. Lights appeared below, the glow of a hospital, bright against the darkness. The landing skid touched the ground. Doors opened. Cold air rushed in, but it no longer terrified him. He was out of the mountain. He was among people again. He was alive. Fast tempo. The medics rolled the stretcher out, rushing him through double doors into a corridor of bright lights and warm air. Voices echoed around him. Commands, questions, urgency. Core temp is dangerously low. Leg fracture, possible compound. We need heated IV. He's responsive but fading. Keep him talking.
Shouting. Hands moved across him, checking his pulse, adjusting blankets, switching equipment. Everything moved fast, precise, controlled. A doctor leaned over him. "Adrian, stay awake. We're working on you." He tried to answer. Only a whisper came out. "Thank you." Then the world softened again. Not darkness, not cold, just release. Warmth spread slowly through his chest. His eyelids dipped. For the first time since the fall, he let them close. Not because he was freezing, not because he was dying, but because he was safe to rest. And he drifted into sleep, a real sleep, for the first time in 30 hours. Fade to black, silence. When Adrian woke, the first thing he felt was warmth. Not the blistering heat of a campfire, not the artificial blast of a heater, but something gentler.
a constant, steady warmth that seeped into his bones like water into dry earth. It wrapped him slowly, inch by inch, dissolving the memory of the cold that had lived inside him for so many hours. Groggy, he blinked, struggling against the heaviness of sleep. A ceiling swam into view, white, soft-lit, unfamiliar. He heard beeping somewhere nearby, murmured voices, footsteps, the faint hum of machines. He tried to sit up, but pain flared along his leg, and hands moved quickly to steady him. Easy, don't move too fast. A nurse leaned over him, her expression calm, almost relieved. "You're in the hospital," she said gently. "You've been asleep for a while. You're safe." The words sank into him slowly, like light filtering through fog. Safe. He swallowed, throat dry. His voice cracked when he tried to speak. Hoarse whisper. "How long?" "About 14 hours, she said. "Your core temperature is back to normal. Your leg is fractured, but stable. You're lucky, Adrian." Lucky. He wasn't sure the word fit. He remembered everything in fragments: the fall, the darkness, the cold. The flare lighting up the shaft like a fiery wound. The shadows moving above him. Lucas's voice. The moment he felt hands gripping him, pulling him out. He closed his eyes. The nurse gave his arm a gentle squeeze. "There's someone here to see you." She stepped aside, and Lucas walked into the room. His jacket was still dusted with snow. His hair was damp from melted frost. He looked exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that lingered after too many hours of adrenaline and too little sleep. But when he saw Adrian awake, he allowed himself a small, relieved smile. "You gave us a scare," Lucas said quietly. Adrian huffed out something like a laugh. "You pulled me out of a mountain." Lucas shook his head. "You kept yourself alive long enough for us to find you. That made all the difference." Pause. Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, but heavy with everything that didn't need to be said. "You'll recover," Lucas added, nodding toward the cast on Adrian's leg. "No permanent damage, some frostbite on your hands, bruising, but you'll walk again." Adrian looked down at his hands. The bandages wrapped around them were clean, white. His fingers moved stiffly, but they moved. The memory of the ice wall flashed through him, how his hands slipped, how the cold tore at his skin, how he clawed anyway. He swallowed. Sincerely, "Thank you," he said, voice soft. Lucas didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled a small object from his jacket pocket and set it on the table beside the bed. The flare, its casing scorched and blackened from the burn, the fuse completely spent, the red paint blistered. Adrian stared at it. "You dropped it when we pulled you out," Lucas said. "Thought you might want to keep it." Adrian reached out slowly, running a finger along its surface. The metal was cold now, just an object, stripped of the meaning it once held. But he remembered what it felt like to light it, to raise it toward the shrinking circle of sky, to scream into the storm, to hope when hope made no sense. "It saved me," Adrian murmured. "No," Lucas said. "You saved yourself. The flare just made it easier for us to see where to look." Adrian didn't argue. He didn't need to. The truth was layered. The flare, the search team, the helicopter, the storm, the mountain. Every part had been a thread in a very thin rope. Lucas stood, preparing to leave. "Rest. The doctors need to monitor you, but you're going to be all right." Adrian nodded. As Lucas reached the door, he paused. "What made you pack a flare?" he asked. "Most hikers don't bring one in early winter." Adrian hesitated, pensive. He thought back to all the times he told himself he didn't need extra gear, that he knew the mountains, that nothing would happen. But something, instinct, caution, a moment of doubt, had made him throw it into his pack. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I'm glad I did." Shouting! Lucas nodded once, quietly. "Sometimes preparedness feels like paranoia," he said, "until the moment it saves your life." The door closed softly behind him. Adrian lay back in the bed, staring up at the ceiling. The warmth seeps deeper into him. The beeping remained steady. His breaths grew slower, calmer. He thought of the shaft, the icy walls, the silence, the crushing weight of time. He thought of the mountain above him, indifferent and eternal. He thought of the moment he had believed it was over, and the moment it wasn't. He picked up the flare again, turning it carefully in his hands. It was small, insignificant, easy to overlook. But in the right moment, in the right hands, it had been more than that. It had been a signal through the dark, a thread of light against the impossible, a reminder that even the smallest spark could break the longest night. He closed his eyes. Outside, the storm continued to fall against the hospital windows, cold, relentless, indifferent. But inside, wrapped in blankets and the quiet hum of warmth, Adrian breathed easily. He had been swallowed by the mountain. He had been frozen, buried, nearly erased. But he had climbed out, or been pulled out, of something few ever escaped. And for the rest of his life, whenever he felt cold, or alone, or lost, he would remember one thing: that even when the world closes around you like ice, even when the mountain tries to keep you, even when the darkness feels endless, there is always a way back into the light.